there. So I'll call our second budget workshop to order. We're dealing with community services tonight. Roll call shows that councilors Laraway, Wingard, Bertha, Sell, Kenny, and Perry are present. And we'll turn it to our town manager to begin with.
Excellent. I think Belle is going to run the presentation behind the scenes. We're going to start with community development. So community development includes, right on the first page, here we go, assessing, planning, code enforcement, and economic development. It's a budget of about $1.2 million in total. And Mitch Stone is the department head that is responsible for all three of those areas. I thought if we broke it down by area, it would be easier. One of the things you're going to hear from me, the reason economic development is a different color is because it is funded in a different way. It is not funded from general fund taxes. Go ahead, Belle. So we can start with assessing services. Our assessing services has a budget of about $115,945, not about, exactly. The assessing department is responsible for determining the level of assessed value of each home, which then makes up the tax, the division of taxes across the entire community. It's an important position. It's also one that is mandatory. The state requires that we have an assessor, and there are very few assessors doing business in Maine. So that becomes an issue. You'll notice we've got very small personnel costs in assessing. That is a portion of 8 hours of administrative assistant who actually provides services throughout the week in the department. And then we have a contract assessor who comes in, works for several communities, Orono being one of them. So when we look at the entire assessing services budget, it's up about $10,935 or 10% over last year. The personnel costs are actually decreased about $3,100. You can go back to that other page, Belle, if you would. Thanks. And that is attributable to a reallocation of the administrative assistant's time. She was putting in 25 hours a week. Now she's putting in, it's 25% of her time. Now she's putting in about 20% of her time. The big increase in this department is in two places this year. The first is in membership dues software licensing. So it's an increase of almost $7,000, and it's entirely attributable to our new software Vision, which is how, if you recall, back when we did the reval, the only way we could get the reval done even remotely close to our budget was to have it done in Vision software and then roll Vision software assessing into our tax collection system. So this is all new software, but it's also what allows you to now go online and look at anybody's home as opposed to having to call the office to get information or a tax card. What you see online is what is in our tax card. It also includes additional ArcGIS licenses because our contract assessor does the parcel splits and they need seats to do that. And an integrated patch into our tax collection software. So that is where they take the value, determine the tax rate, determine what everybody's taxes should be, and it flows into Trio, which is our financial accounting software that tracks every payment everybody makes on their taxes. Our professional services has a net increase of $7,150. It is the combination of an increase in the assessing contract of $12,000 and the removal of the budget line for assessment data update. and an increase in the Registry of Deed Services of $150. So our assessing contract was new last year. When we brought the assessor in, I don't know that they understood the level of work that Orono would be with assessing. When we sat down to renegotiate that contract, they gave me a price, and when I went and did a comparison of what other people are paying for the same service, I won't say we're getting a great deal because then he might want to increase his price, but I will say that we are most definitely paying on or below par. So it was really hard for me to argue that. So our issue in assessing that we would want to just bring to your attention for this coming year. So the assessing budget actually went down last year because we moved from a full-time paid employed assessor to the contract assessing services. It is back up about where it was before. And we would continue this budget funds continuing the transition to contract services, having our new software and using it, having more user-friendly record access and transparent assessment methods. So keeping on with the best practices that we put in place when we went, when we did the reval and brought on the new assessor. Questions about assessing?
Is that professional services, is that one full FTE that is anybody on site, or how does that, what is the current?
So we're hiring a company, Down East Assessing Services. It is 2 people, one of whom is our assessor of record. And he is on site at least 1 day a week, every Thursday. He is here. He responds to inquiries and does other work when he's not here, but he has to be on site for at least 1 full day a week.
So we had a full-time assessor for a couple of years. Rick Sands, our last one.
No,
we had someone in between.
We had Rick Sands, then we moved to Lorna Thompson for a little while, and then we moved to Mike Noble, and then we went to our contract assessor.
And so I mean, I hear what you said, full-time person, we saved some money, now we're back to where we were, but we had a full-time person. It's 40 hours a week for just us. Is the main issue that there's nobody to hire, or because it just seems like one, we would get a lot more work with a full-time person that was here, and probably for comparable dollars.
So Lorna was not full-time. Mike also did code enforcement for us. So they were both kind of split. And they were both working through this reval to get data that we didn't have prior to them coming here, which is what the whole reval project was about. We went out to try to get an assessor. We had people apply to be an assessor here. The people that made it through the process were not people that would work well in Orono. They didn't have the temperament to work well here. So that's when we went to move to this contract price. I don't know that you would not be able to bring somebody else on for $80,000 a year, who also, when you think about salary is going to be that or more for an assessor, plus you start adding in $20,000 a year for their health insurance and their main PERS, and so it is significantly more costly.
So my question along the same line is, we know how the work got done with a full-time employee.
Mm-hmm.
And we have experience now of how the work is getting done with a contracted service.
Mhm.
Are you satisfied with the level of work that's being, the amount of work that's being done with the contracted service when you compare it to the era when we had a full-time employee?
So I am in that, I think anytime you bring somebody on, there's a growing, a period of growing pains, and we have gone through that, and has been exacerbated by rolling in a whole new reval at the same time that we brought this person on. I think one of the differences is this contract employee and or contract service is bringing to the table an understanding of technology that we have not had here in the past. And the reval allowed us to collect data that now allows us to utilize technology in a way that can get a lot of things done a lot quicker than before. If I had to say where I think we need some work, and it's nothing I haven't already said, it is most definitely in the area of public community, like public interaction, and we're working our way through that. We have goals, we're working through that. This is a one-year contract. I think we would be hard pressed right now, this time of year, in this area of Maine, to bring on even another contract at this point. Most of the contracts are coming up out of extreme southern Maine or New Hampshire. And so the costs are high. Mitch was part of that.
Kind of to go back to when our assessor, when Mike retired in January, we put it out, and we had 2 applications in 6 months. And then we got 2 more towards the end. Very limited number of folks, and that, wasn't necessarily the quality that we would come to expect.
Under the previous situations, was it half and half code, half?
No, it was probably,
What was the proportion?
it was probably more assessing than code. More probably 60-40, 70-30. But the big difference is that we did not have records. We did not have property cards. It took longer because if you were going to put a value on a property, you had to go look at 3 or 4 properties to find it comparable. That is part of the reason why we worked so hard to get the reval done and rolled in, because the data was just not good data before.
Do you have
So
Yes?
I was just going to mention one thing that you mentioned, but not, you haven't hit it very hard, is the GIS capabilities of this consultant. They're able to actually, anytime we have a parcel split or new information for our actual tax maps, they're able to do that within GIS, and then we can import that into the parcel viewer so that then we can actually see new properties on the parcel viewer, and that has not happened for several years. So that's a capability that we would, if we didn't have it through this consultant, that we would end up hiring out as a separate contract.
So I know you do also have GIS expertise on staff that, based on my friendship with that person years ago, I know he's capable of doing that, I will say.
So it has to do more with being able to read the deeds and understand how a parcel is split. And so you have to have not only the GIS expertise, but you also have to have the real estate and the legal knowledge to back it up to understand how to do that split.
Other questions or comments on assessing?
Thank you, Bill. So I'm just, go ahead. So we saw the dip in this period of the budget last year due to reduced personnel costs. We see the slow climb due to increased licensing fees and contracting fee, and that's where we're watching. So were we to go back to a more full-time employee, we would still have to subscribe to those software licensing fees.
Oh, absolutely. That's where all the data is held.
Thank you.
Anything else before we move on?
So do you want to pause, answer any questions about the specifics in the budget and then go on to the next?
I think
section?
that makes sense. Or any other specific questions? I was interested in hearing about the software license. Beat, but you covered that.
Okay.
So I'm all set.
We have enough GIS seats or portals now to do everything we need to do. Staff not gonna have to buy another GIS license.
No, just the ones that are in here. We have the 2 licenses for the department.
I think we're ready to move on.
All right, so we're gonna go on to planning. And there's considerable movement in planning this year, so I'm gonna try to take it at the high level and tell me how much information you need. So our planning budget is $100,685 dollars. It's an increase of about $12,525 or 14% this year. This budget funds half of our planner and 40% of the administrative assistant for the department. The personnel costs are up about $20,275 or 23%. And that's primarily attributable to a raise for the town planner. Partway through the year because they were so under market. And also the town planner is moving to a remote or a hybrid work environment. He's moving and it is, number one, they're very, very hard to find in this part of the state. And number two, he's really, really good and we're walking into a comprehensive plan process. So I had talked with the town council about keeping him on in a hybrid fashion. So he will be down in Southern Maine and be here 1 day a week on site and then available through Zoom and all the other things. That's an average. There might be sometimes that he's here for a few days and then goes, and other weeks when he won't be here. Given the experience that other towns have had with contract planners where they contract them, they come from a distance, this seems like a hybrid method that will work for us. But it also pointed out for us when we looked at this last fall, that our planner was beyond undercompensated. He was not getting what a new planner with a bachelor's degree, fresh out of school with no experience would garner. And it was not a fair wage to pay somebody with the background and experience that he has.
Is that true given cost of living in this area, or were you looking at national data on that?
No, I was looking at local data. And then in this department, the supplies and equipment have gone down by about $2,000. And our professional services line has decreased by $5,700. And if you look, the reason for that decrease in the professional services, we are not paying for mapping services. We're not paying for planning services. We had put that in, Kyle, well, he's been with us for a while, had been considered new. We no longer need the planning. He's not using additional planning, outside planning consultant to help him, hasn't. And we're not using outside mapping. They're able to do that internally. So when we think about our planner, the issues for this coming year, our planner is moving to this hybrid work environment. We're preparing for a comp plan process. We're managing a high volume of permitting and development. That is continued to stay on screech, which is wonderful for the town. And we're implementing some new laws that impact historical ordinances, specifically related to the housing of people and animals. How about we put it that way? The constitutional amendment around the right to food and the affordable housing is going to cause some interesting impact to our local ordinances. And those are all land use ordinances that the planner will be right in the middle of working through. Planning questions?
I had one, and this is a little bit, I guess it's not just for this line item, but in places where there are positions split between different budget areas, it's a little bit hard to compare. So I see, you know, like a 24% increase in salary on this line item, and I'm curious, if I look at the other place where there's the town planner budget, like how big is that raise overall?
That raise was a total of 15,000 over part. He got, yeah, 15,000 overall.
15,000 a year, which is how big an increase? Like I said, it's like, oh my gosh, I need to get the calculator. Yeah. Thanks for looking that up. I appreciate it.
About a 23% increase.
Okay.
So a couple of questions I had. We have entered into this hybrid planning arrangement on a one-year basis.
It's a 3-year contract, but in order for us to go beyond year 1, both parties have to agree. So there's a formal check-in in year.
So if we decided at the end of the coming year that it really isn't working as well as we had hoped it would, and we really need to have a planner who's here all the time.
Yep.
We could make that change
Yep.
at that point if we wanted to.
Yep.
And I certainly agree that I think we have a very good person and it's worth trying. The other question I had is a kind of a small one. I was looking at that travel line and I just can't figure out that increase.
So based on labor laws, his office is still here. We are responsible for
Yep.
paying him to get
I
here.
got that.
And we also have overnight, a few overnight accommodation built into this.
How much- What was our mileage reimbursement rate?
58.5 cents per month.
Because I was just playing with it and looking at roughly 300 miles round trip.
Yep.
From Portland to Orono, 52 weeks in the year.
Yep.
And tried 30% and 40% and couldn't get up to even half of the total figure. And I understand about, I wasn't including any overnight.
Yeah, I think we put a little bit of overnightage in there.
So I'm not aware of that labor law, but I would say it kind of surprises me that someone can move away from their job. I guess it must be a negotiation or something, because is that a public employee thing? I've never heard of anybody getting paid to travel to their place of employment.
Well, I guess it all depends on where you put their place of employment. We're saying this place of employment is Portland and he's coming here.
Are we opening an office in Portland?
It's home office.
I mean, the cost of travel each week would be substantial, but if you were to be working here, it would function as a cut into his pay. If you were to travel. Like I see the value of paying for travel, but it's certainly the 3,369% increase certainly does catch my eye.
It's 60 cents a mile. You said 58, but
Yeah,
it's much easier for me to
Yeah.
multiply by 60.
you go for it.
And using the 300 miles in 52 weeks, that came up to $9,360. So I guess I know where it came from.
Can speak to his, you mentioned his experience, and I don't know anything about his experience. So I'm curious if you could just speak to that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Leo, can you please make sure that you're speaking directly to the owl because you're very difficult to hear? I think that was Leo.
That was, thank you. I just asked for, if Sophie could share some of his background and experience, as I'm not familiar with it. I think in my mind, I thought he was new when he came here, but I don't have a reference for that. So if you could share that.
So Kyle has, I don't have it off the top of my head. Leo's got a bachelor's degree, he's got a master in planning. He worked for, I don't know if it was the city of Philadelphia or if it was a division. It was the water district in Philadelphia doing planning work. And he also completed the Evan Rickard on the job training methodology. I think even beyond that, Kyle comes to us with a lot of life experience. He's traveled the globe, and you see that in the way he approaches planning and the community process. You know, it's interesting because at first I thought it was Evan's style, and that's not what we see. We're seeing Kyle's style. But I don't want to get too far into it because the budget really isn't the place to do performance evaluations. But I will say that when I compare what I see my colleagues getting from folks even with master's degrees, it is not as polished and as understanding of the whole construct behind planning. So.
Thank you.
Other questions on planning? Ready to move on?
Right.
Let's move on.
All right, we're gonna go to code enforcement. So code enforcement has a total budget of $132,595. It's up $14,150.12, which is 14%. The personnel costs here, it's up $26,555 or 28%. That's attributable to a few things. We've already talked about market adjustment, but the major shift in this was an increase in the code officer's salary. When the code officer came to us, he did not have the training or technical sign off to be able to be an electrical inspector. His salary when he was hired reflected that. The town paid the city of Old Town $7,500 a year to both manage the electrical permits as well as train our, work with our assessor to learn the new skill. So he received that certification. We did not have the money mid-year to make an adjustment, so I have made that adjustment here. So along with shoreline zoning, code office, plumbing inspection, I'm gonna miss something, business licensing, he also now can manage the electrical inspections and permitting process. Our software and licensing is up a whopping $45. Our vehicle expense is down $950. We have leased a electric car with no payments except the end of lease fee of $340. So we don't have gas. When we look online and we see what reasonable repair for an electric vehicle that's 2 years old is, it's like $150. So that's what we put in the budget line. Our professional services are down $11,500. And that's due to, again, that code certification that I just talked about, that we're not paying Old Town anymore to do that. And also the way our code office is now dealing with permitting, documentation of permitting, the way we're notifying the world of permits, the steps that Mitch has put in place with our code officer leave me very comfortable to reduce the legal fees we were paying, the budget for the legal fees for code. So I pulled $3,000 out of that budget line because I don't think we'll need it next year.
Questions about code?
Yeah, so that last thing you just brought up around the professional services,
I'm sorry.
around the professional services, the reduction in that budget line. What are some of the processes and procedures aimed at mitigating permit appeals?
So a couple of things. We are putting permit appeals out on the web, so everybody can see that there's a permit has been issued. We also are notifying people with postcards if a permit has been issued to a neighbor. And right on the permits in big, huge, bold letters is your warning that if you start your work within however 30 days, 60 days, whatever the days are, that it's still appealable and you might have to put it back. Those steps are helpful. Going very carefully through checklists that have been developed around shoreline, is it a shoreline zone? If it is, here are the things we need to consider. Is it a general business license? If it is, here are the things we need to consider. It has ensured that we haven't just said, oh gee, that sounds like a great idea, which in the past, before Pat got here, maybe had been said a couple of times. And I think the biggest piece is moving towards this area of voluntary compliance and education and taking a lot more time with projects to talk to people about what can be done and what can't be done. So essentially, spending more time on the front end has helped us not have to go back on the back end. What was costing us the money wasn't so much, there will be questions as you go through with code enforcement about the interpretation of an ordinance. Ordinance language, we'll always have that and we'll need some legal advice. What was costing us the most money was when people wanted to argue about whether or not a permit was lawfully issued, whether it went to an appeals board or it just became an internal argument that we had to bring the lawyer into. So having more communication with both the person who's trying to do the work and the neighbors has, I think, really helped that. And I'm not seeing the same types of emails coming in, and I'm not seeing the same types of questions to the lawyer, which makes me think that what Pat and Mitch have implemented is working. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was helpful, thank you.
Any other questions on code?
I had another one. Around the increase in salary, you said that, I think the number that you said originally to compensate for his new electrical certification, it didn't quite match also what I was seeing in this raise.
So that's not just all him.
Okay,
So it is also that 40% assistant, a little bit more of her time because she's supporting him more.
Okay.
And it's the 7,500 would be the base and then the market on top of that. And that, yeah, that, I'll
Thank
say
you.
that.
Is there a way that you could suggest that, I guess I can reinvent this wheel myself just for my own curiosity, or tell me if this already exists. Is there a place that I could get information about, like, person by person overall wage increases? Awesome, great. I would love to see that compiled document at some point. That doesn't need to be now. Thanks.
Not even a lot of work.
Great, thank you.
For the code office, I would just say, I'm sorry, that The one thing I do want to bring up, along with, of course, the implementation of new laws, which code and planning have to kind of work through that. Bring back to the same thing I talk about every year, which is with a code department of one, we have a lot of ordinances. Orono has a lot of ordinances that go beyond what other communities have is in terms of land use and general life in Orono. And so when you look at a shop of one, trying to deal with all of those ordinances, we are most definitely a complaint-based system. A complaint-based system is not always the most equitable of systems, because if you live in a neighborhood like mine and your trash cans are out at noon, one of the neighbors is probably just gonna pull it up by your garage so we stop hitting it. In other neighborhoods, there's not that tolerance. And so we're chasing people who have left garbage cans out because it's what the ordinance says we're supposed to do. So it creates at times this feeling of not enforcing the laws equally across the entire community. I don't have a way of resolving that unless we were going to take the time and the money to put more code officers on and break the town up and do, along with complaints, proactive enforcement. So I bring that to your attention, not because I am angling for more code officers, but because oftentimes when people are a complaint comes in, they want to go to council and talk about all the other people that are doing the same thing. And we truly are very much complaint driven. Sometimes complaints can be about whole neighborhoods, and we'll go try to be proactive in that neighborhood. But that's just if you want something different, we're going to have to fund something different.
Two comments. I think it was in there. I like the idea of hopefully a code enforcement person coming forward with streamlined, reduced ordinances, suggestions. Maybe I'm miswording that, but I think streamlining was part of what was in there, because you just said, well, it's difficult because we have so many. I think that person is probably in a good position to be suggesting how we streamline that. And I'd love to hear those as we not as a project, but as it occurs, to have it come forward.
So we do bring that, and the last couple of things we've brought forward, we've been sent back because they're important to the community. So I think we can do that again.
Keep them coming.
Okay.
Well, and that's also part of our process in community development, is that between the planner, the code officer, myself, we are sitting down and talking about different things that are coming up and what are affecting those, and how do we look at what our ordinances are and how they're affecting different things. Not always, sometimes the ordinance is the ordinance, but there are certainly times that we talk about, well, gee, is there a way to change this that keeps the intent, but also helps these things move smoothly? But most of our job is helping people navigate our system, right? No matter what they're coming in with. And that's kind of goes back to why we're mitigating some of that after those questions that come after, is that we're starting out very early saying, this is the process. These are all the things that you're going to find through the process. So people are very aware. So by the time they get to the end, there isn't any confusion. It doesn't feel like there's a surprise someplace, even though some of these things are challenging. So that's one of the biggest goals that we have.
Thank you. My other comment was, I guess, considering we had a 40%, a person doing this 40% of the time, the fact that we have a full-time person now, we should be probably obviously doing a lot more, or even if it is still complaint-based.
So when that person was doing it 40% of the time, we were literally not dealing with some complaints. So that was during we had an individual have to retire unexpectedly due to medical reasons, and there was a 6-month wait for us to find another person. Like assessing, code officers are very, very hard to find. So there were things that didn't get done in that time, Leo.
And lastly, I'll just say I have used the system, the online system. I feel like it's pretty smooth. I've had a really good experience with it and with the staff, so.
Side.
We tried.
Can I ask one question about how this position interfaces with the feedback that we received from like Webster Neighborhood and other people? So we are still working in a complaint-based regimen. Are there, I guess, staff members, or are there other people in town other than the code enforcement officer who can generate feedback or complaints to code enforcement? So if somebody is driving down the road and they see a code violation, they don't just say, well, that's something civil, I'm not gonna look at it. I mean, does everybody get a base level of training to understand how to do this interface with the code enforcement officer?
So there are some people who it's part of their job. Belle, me, Mitch, Megan, Lori, I would say to some degree. Their fire, when fire goes on a call, it will generate something. Sometimes with police, it will generate something. It is, so there's some internal, sure, we can internally generate things. And that is also a, in the ordinance, like in the ordinance, in my contract, it says I have to do that. That said, I do not run around and like eagle eye every potential code violation. And my street's off limits. I hunker down and I don't do anything on my street, and the code officer knows that. But there is a level that works together, but there are also times when something big percolates. So, for example, we were starting to see the advent of some illegal junkyards. So we have three junkyards in town that are grandfathered and have to follow certain rules. And then every once in a while, you get the people that really don't like to get rid of their stuff, and it just kind of begins to create what is statutorily known as a junkyard. So in a situation like that, Mitch and Ed Lesky and Rob St. Louis and the code officer and I sat down and talked about, this is what constitutes a junkyard. Go forth and let's pick out all that we can see. And then we sent out letters reminding people what a junkyard was and that they needed to be licensed to have a junkyard, and that they couldn't get a license in it. So, and then Pat gave them an amount of time and then just went and looked at them. So something that's major will trip into a more of a almost task force, for lack of a better term, response. That's what happened in the Webster neighborhood. When we went in and we heard some substance to what those concerns were, we sent out police, fire, code, Bell to look at what was happening in the neighborhood, and then talk to people about bringing it into compliance. So helpful at all?
Yes. It just seems like it's an impossible job for one person to be responsible for, unless there's other.
A lot of things that we do here in town involves multiple bodies like that.
Anything else on code?
I don't.
You ready to move on?
So economic development is the lion's share of our community development budget. It's about $830,000, almost $831,000. It's down about $12,900 or -2%. The thing that makes economic development a little different is that we fund this through tax increment financing development programs, which are restricted funds. So the town has 6 now. 7 TIF districts. And those TIF districts are districts where development at some point in time was proposed. The town came in and saw a need or the town council at the time saw an economic benefit to sheltering the additional value that that development would bring in. It went through a very lengthy process and got approval from the state to have this TIF district. TIF district expenditures have to align with activities that the town council and the state of Maine approved at the time that the TIF was either initially created or amended. So in very broad brushstroke, every TIF district has a different development plan. Most all of them allow for salaries for economic development purposes, costs associated with supporting an economic development office. One of the reasons that you see so many partial places, this is one of the departments that is most shared with other places, because somebody's full job, the only full job we have on staff that qualifies to be funded out of the TIF would be Mitch's job, the Economic Development Director. However, putting on community events that pull people into businesses, working with businesses to put on events would be an allowed expense. It's business support, it's promotion, it's marketing. But that's not all of Megan's job. So a small portion of Megan's salary is paid for out of the TIF. Another piece of the TIF is all the administrative costs associated with it, all of the calculations and payment of expenses, all that pure administrivia stuff. A portion of my salary is funded out of the TIF. The planner, the work that the planner does associated with supporting business development, walking people through how to get where they want to go. That is why 50% of his salary is funded out of planning and 50% is funded out of the TIF. Have I made my point or should I continue? Good, okay.
So when we look at the full-time salary line, that includes all of those segments that you just mentioned.
So it's part of our IT GIS, it's part of me, it's a small portion of Bell's time. It's 8 hours a week of the administrative assistant for the department. It's planner. We have the business liaison position that is funded out of that department. Right now at 100%, that is 100%, I'm sorry. We're with that vacancy, we're looking at whether or not we have to shift responsibilities around a little bit with that one. But the idea being every year you have to look at the workflow and the workload and then determine how much of it is allowed. It's not just because I want to. I like it and it's because I want to, but that's not the way it works. So when we look at this budget, it's funding one full-time, well, really 2 full-time and 2.75 full-time equivalents. And like I said, we had talked previously about the business development officer or the business liaison, who still hadn't quite come, has given notice and will be retiring. We're still trying to figure out whether and how to fill that position. So personnel costs are up about $27,000 or 7%. Some of that is shifting. Some of that is we have given that raise to Kyle is going to be our planner is going to be in here. We had a couple of steps for people who were new moving up the steps. Our membership dues, software licensing and supplies is up a whopping $550. Professional services, events, business support is down $1,625. And I want to talk just for a few minutes about that. When you look in your budget, there's a hole on page 18. You really start at the newsletter and kind of work down to where you see the last row that talks about principal for the Katahdin debt, which we'll get to in a minute. That's all kind of activities that we did, business support. And we've kind of taken a different tack with this. It was starting to grow, and we started to kind of shave it back, thinking that the support that people really needed in this was kind of what we had that business liaison doing, resolving issues and helping them work through processes and connect them to people who could assist them. But if you look, some of the things that were like special community projects, that is, we took a couple of budget lines. We did the trade shows and the business support line, and we put that into special community projects. Some of that are things that people really appreciate, like the concerts on the green. So anything that we can look at with a lens of economic development and say, this is bringing people to the community to help support our businesses. And with that extra person being able to pull businesses into that more makes it even more effective. So it's not just you're bringing people to the community, but the businesses are jumping on board with what you're bringing to help advertise that business. So there's been a little bit of shuffling in this. We have backed off consulting. We have increased the newsletter expense because I don't know if people have recognized, but the Orono Observer, which we think is an awesome marketing tool for local businesses. We have not significantly increased advertising, but we have added like almost double the size of the newsletter. And we get really good feedback that for some people that aren't tech savvy, they want that in the mail. And then on the business support page, a lot of that amount between is $4,000 of that. We actually support entrepreneurs that aren't ready to even be in the Upstart Center by themselves at this point. But they can come in, use our space, have the receptionist, and kind of support. It's part of a pretty involved relationship with the University of Maine's efforts through their.
Yeah, one of these typically are developing businesses that are applying for grant funds that need office space to apply for the grant funds. And a lot of them would then, once they get that, actually move in the Upstart Center and rent more space. But it's that kind of in-between stage that they kind of need a little bit of help. And it's part of what we've been talking about, the continuum of entrepreneurship from whether it's university, other places, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that's spinning out of the Foster Center. And they are coming with these great ideas and trying to grow them, and they kind of get stuck. And so we're trying to work together to kind of keep that going so they have a place to be, develop their business, and then can grow. Hopefully they grow here. Worst case scenario, they grow in the Bangalore region, but realistically, we'd like them to grow here. So many of them need to be close to the university because a lot of what they do is based on research that's happening there.
So our debt, we actually have two pieces of debt that are funded out of the downtown and transit oriented TIF district. One is that beautiful wall and parking area by UCU. That was a public-private partnership that the town took $2 million of debt to put the wall up and expand the parking to support the development of UCU there. And the other is our parking, which is Pine Street lot. That, if you recall, a few years ago, got all dug up and we fixed some of the electrical and then we repaved it, so it was actually not a bunch of holes, which was. So that debt is town debt. It's paid out of the downtown transit oriented tip. In the budget, you will see CEA agreements. Those are credit enhancement agreements. These are contractual obligations that a council at some point in time agreed to, where an amount of new projects taxes are given back to them. It's kind of a but-for clause, but for this TIF, you wouldn't be able to do the project. Our significant credit enhancement agreements would be Penobscot Valley Dermatology has one, Orono Brewing Company has one, Rose LLC, which is the Stone Manor Inn and the convent have one. Star Properties had one for all of their additional. So along with the creation of a new business, council, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, created a program where if somebody added a certain amount of value to their existing property within the downtown transit oriented TIF, the town council would enter into a boilerplate credit enhancement agreement that essentially gave them 50% of their taxes on the new value over 10 years. So they did that because they were very concerned at the lack of investment in properties and felt like commercial properties in downtown were really starting to erode. If you look at the contractual, so those all come out of tax increment financing district program development funds. That is a decrease this year, that $189,750 is a decrease of about $22,000. Most of that is results from the termination of the Star Properties credit enhancement agreement. So when that changed hands, their agreement got terminated because it's no longer functioning as the hotel. Yep. So to put that into perspective, $189,750,000 sounds, well, it doesn't sound, it is large. But for example, 104,000 of that is returning a piece of the additional value that brought us Virago Pines in. So that's all one. And that predates me, so I don't know the exact story behind it, but all the other credit enhancement agreements make up that less than $90,000.
Does that go on with Derigo? Does that go on indefinitely or is there?
No, a credit enhancement agreement cannot go on indefinitely. So you have to have a TIF in order to have a credit enhancement agreement. The longest a TIF can live is 30 years. It can be renewed, but it's a process. So a credit enhancement agreement cannot go longer than the life of the TIF.
So when that expires, we can no longer shelter the value of that. Then we theoretically are collecting the remainder of what. So that's going to theoretically play out.
So the credit enhancement agreement can expire before the TIF expires. So you can continue to shelter
Gotcha.
and not
Okay.
have to pay the credit enhancement. That's what happened over at EnvisionNet, where Netflix was and where Sargent is now. That's still under TIF. There was a credit enhancement agreement. The town terminated it when the initial project didn't work as expected. And we have been collecting. Those TIF funds have done things like made really nice sidewalks and put in lighting in the park and helped us fix a really major violation with the Army Corps of Engineers on wetlands, and paved it. So just small things.
Are there any big changes coming to? Credit enhancement agreements?
No. So the way the town usually does it, when a project comes in, we give the TIF attorney all sorts of information, and they come back to us with the calculation of the tax shift. Meaning, if this project just went on the tax rolls, here's the amount of tax you would have. If this project, and this is how it impacts both the school and the town. If this project is sheltered, this is what it does. And as a general rule, the town council, I've never seen the town council go above the tax shift, but they'll look at it over the life of the credit enhancement agreement. And I've seen some at 20 years and some at 10. And they might, like with Penobscot Valley Dermatology, that credit enhancement agreement was built with an underlying assumption, because it's what we were being told, that there would be $2 million of additional value. And so we get the first $2 million of additional value we keep. The credit enhancement agreement then deals with all the money that comes in over $2 million of new value, of total value. And then, I'm saying that wrong. The credit enhancement agreement is based on us getting $2 million of taxes on $2 million. But the property owner knew, as a new business, he was going to need more help on the front end than the back end. So it's a 10-year credit enhancement agreement, but it front loaded. It was like 60% at the beginning, and it's like 30% at the end. Have I answered all the questions that you would have about credit enhancement agreements, Leo?
So,
All right.
And I'd just add that, remember that the TIFs, the sheltering of the increased value benefits the school in terms of state subsidy, benefits the town in terms of revenue sharing.
Yes.
one more question. So the service events and support, is that where Orono Festival Day used to reside or not?
So when we first got here, no. When I got here, but when I first got here, it was in the Parks and Rec budget, and it was very minimal. Then as time went on, the town's role kept getting bigger. And it was in here towards the end of Festival Day. And the budget was about $11,000.
And was that just people's time or spend an actual money? Because I know people pay to be in, well, band, no, we pay bands probably.
We paid bands, we paid for fireworks, we paid overtime because it was Saturday. We paid to up staff for public safety events out of that. And there was issue, things like, I can't even remember, it was so long ago, but yeah, we paid for bands, we rented some space, we rented some equipment.
How long has it been?
Oh. So you've been here for, huh? So 9, 10 years ago? 9 years ago, because I've been here 11, so.
Other questions on this portion?
Can I just speak to the Black Bear Express because it's one of the items of discussion? So I think I did a pretty good job in and amongst other things explaining that the town of Orono has 2 different transit relationships with the city of Bangor. One is for the regional community connector service, which somebody can go from College Ave all the way to Hamden and back. We just pay based on our revenue generating mile. And it's an assessment. The city of Bangor figures out how expensive it is to run the service. All of the region is just kind of given an assessment based on the revenue generating line. The Black Bear Express is different. It's also run by the city of Bangor. It is a partnership that started before I even came. It was a third Maine DOT, a third the University of Maine, and a third the town. And that ran as a pilot for 2 or 3 years and then became 50-50 with the town and the University of Maine. DOT would, evidently the town knew when they started it was only going to be a pilot for them to help get it started. That is a little bit different than the regional program in that there is a group that includes town officials, University of Maine officials, and a representative from Orchard Trails and the Avenue, because they also pay a small amount to be part of the project, part of the project. And they determine, that group determines the level of service that we would get. And essentially, if University of Maine and the town agree, and the other 2 small partners can't, don't throw up red flags that make a lot of sense, then we end up kind of changing service to meet whatever the demand is. There are a couple of things, decisions that were made, like we don't run late at night, because if we ran late at night and it became a drunk bus, which evidently at one time there was one in Old Town that really was a drunk bus. But based on DOT laws, which the city of Bangor has to follow, you'd end up taking the bus out of service every time somebody made a mess on the bus because they had too much to drink. So that decision was made not to run it late at night. We've had Saturday service. We've gotten rid of Saturday service. The Black Bear Express assessment is entirely on its own. So unlike taking 5% of a big total budget, this is every hour that we run, it's $75 an hour, loaded time. And then they look at us for the service and they say, this is what we think your capital plan will cost over time. And they tell us how much we have to pay for that as well. This number has been all over the map. This is the smallest I have seen it in a very long time. It might be because we have done such dips in service because of COVID. One would think with the gas prices the way they are, when students come back, so this is only a 9-month service right now. When students come back, we would expect ridership to go way up if gas prices stay where they are. But during COVID, they just tanked and we actually ended up shutting down the service. So this is a service we have some control over. I think, this is just me, I think this is a one-time dip in the cost. Last year we were paying almost 105,000, 4,000 for it. And I don't want people to think that that's a long-term $88,000 project. It's probably going to bounce back up.
Hey, Sophie.
Yes.
One of the reasons why the assessment is down this year is because we were assessed assuming full operating from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. For 2020 and 2021. And, this 22 school year. And we were not able to do that, not only because the students weren't around, but the bus didn't have enough drivers. So we actually had to reduce our hours significantly. So we have created a reserve account. So that means that our capital contribution is significantly lower as well this year because we don't need to put as much in. We have a brand new bus already and we have a reserve account kind of built up.
And we expect to see a bounce back up over time.
I can't tell you what gas prices are going to do, but we have asked to continue with the hours from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. For the next school year. If we change back to 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., there would indeed be an increase.
So,
Do we
Yeah.
Monitor, do we monitor ridership? We probably don't at this point, I'm guessing. Do we have a sense for ridership on that? Because I mean, I think it's a great service. And I've always thought it was a great service. I have no idea what kind of people ride it. I'm curious if you do.
so I can't tell you what kind of people.
Not kind of people, what level of people?
But I think one of Belle's frustrations when we started to really dig into this is that up until at least fairly recently, it was simply, are they writing it from like 7 to noon or noon to late, right, Belle? So we couldn't really tell how many came out, like, was there a significant decrease at 6 o'clock? Was there so I think one of the things we've been trying to work through the partner transit group, which is the group of people who, that group that gets together to try to understand where the actual use is coming from. But we know how many people have ridden it on certain sections of the day, just not by the hour.
Do you feel like, well, not even a worthwhile question to go with it. It's something I assume we'll watch. Hard to say if we're only running till 6, if it's needed at 9, I guess, that's the downside.
Yeah. Well, you know, one way we check that is how many complaints are we getting? And it's not a perfect way, but at least it helps a little bit.
We also try to put a survey out at least once a year. Oftentimes we're doing this with a university class we're trying to find out what would need to happen in order to increase ridership, what hours would be convenient. Most of the requests we get for increased service are not from the 6 to 9 p.m., but from the 9 to 1 a.m. Time frame. And that's one that for liability and other reasons we have not wanted to venture into.
Thanks.
So as we look at kind of the questions ahead of us,
Are we moving on? I have a question
Sure.
about. Just real quick. All right, so there's an increase of $2,500 to the legal services line. And you said that comes out of the decrease of $2,500 from the business support line, but I'm guessing business.
There's a 25, community. I thought you said legal services, not community support.
Okay, so legal services is increasing by $2,500.
Yes.
Okay. Business support, which included some of our legal services, is decreasing by $2,500. Correct.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that the $2,500 that's coming out of business support is more than just legal. Like business support, the reduction in
yeah.
business support is for other things.
Not legal stuff. In the additional business support.
Okay. So why are we are we expecting greater litigation or expecting greater need for legal services?
So
Or is it just a shift from one area in the budget into legal services?
it's not a shift, it's more of an expense that we've had. And I just want to look real quick because when we create that economic development budget, it's actually a series of TIF budgets that flow into that. Let me just look real quick. So if you look in the expense budget that I provided you, Jeff, with your years of expenditures.
For page 69, I think.
Yep. you will see that, we had been putting that legal expenses, if you look. Let's go this page.
Oh, yeah, okay.
On the Envision Net TIF, if you look at our legal budget, you will see that we are talking about over expense consistently
Okay.
in that. So one of the things that we've done in this is we've moved. So I don't give you all the TIF budgets because I'll take the same budget line and move it from this TIF to this TIF depending upon what the balance of the TIF is and other program eligible things. But in general, when I look, we're spending between $5,000 and $8,000 a year on legal expenses related to the TIFs. And it can be anything from our latest legal expense, when Star Properties changed hands, and we had to figure out how did it qualify as a default or did it transfer the CEA? That all costs money. The development out at the tech park, we have people who want to take advantage of the land banking. That took an effort to figure out how that was going to work and what the legal maneuvers had to be to do that. So if we're working with a developer to bring a project here and we have legal expense, we try to put it in a TIF because it's an eligible expense if it's for development.
We have kind of a similar general question. So when you set those tips up, it's a town and a state thing, and you can you or do we create like flexible buckets where you know, this?
So I try very hard to have buckets that are as flexible as possible. For example, the downtown transit oriented TIF, a lot of the infrastructure improvement that you've seen happening in this region has actually come out of the TIF. So you get the benefit of the infrastructure without having to pay for it out of the specific mill rate. But yes, we try really hard to make those as broad as.
Thanks. I think we probably did.
Yeah.
To the extent.
To the
legally
extent,
possible.
to the, yeah, practicable, feasible, whatever, yes. Were there other questions about economic development?
No, I guess my concern was that given a 50% increase in the legal services line, we're not expecting a 50% increased need of legal services. It really is the reapportionment of services that we already
Yes,
have access.
yes. And you know, what I am expecting is more development, and specifically more development in the main tech park.
Okay, so ready to move on?
All right. Now this time, I hope you won't have to listen to me quite so much. We're gonna move on to Parks and Rec, actually. So
Are you seeing the Parks and Rec?
I am, I got
Okay, excellent.
skates and football helmets and all sorts of stuff. So our Parks and Rec department. You can go to the next page, Val. You want to start?
Sure, I will go through it. The first three slides are kind of the foundation of how we operate, Parks and Rec operates. Sophie and I were actually noting today that we developed this in 2016 and it's very appropriate to today, even though lots of things have changed in the world. But I think it's important because this is kind of how we've guided our decision-making and moved through with Parks and Recreation as we set the foundation so that we could grow. Before I got here, there were lots of different things that were going on. I know that it's been documented for some of the new folks that were kind of practiced from old times that weren't necessarily current with the way we should be doing things. And there were things that were falling through the cracks, or things that there was assumption that people were covered under insurance and they were not under insurance because we didn't have the oversight that was needed to make that happen from our insurance company. So we had to make some changes, but as you can see, our mission statement to provide quality opportunities that promote community health, wellness, social equity, and conservation in an inclusive, safe, secure, and enjoyable environment. And I think that kind of sets the tone for the direction that we look at. Val, if you want to go to the next slide. We have these guiding principles that help us when we're looking at things and how to best do that, allocating finite resources to provide diverse offerings, capitalize on regional offerings, do not duplicate, are priced in a manner that residents can reasonably participate, seek to find highest level of inclusivity, provide equal opportunities to participate, and ensure proper oversight of high quality and safe experience. Val, you can go to the next one as well. So we do that. We kind of set up these 4 different ways in which we can offer programming that work back to those other guiding principles. One was, we know we have finite resources, and how do we best use them? The first and most obvious is a town sponsored, where the town is overseeing everything, financial control, approval of methods. Basically, we run the program from soup to nuts. Collaborative partnerships are more like what we do with the University of Maine or adult education or regional rec programs, where we're working with them via either contract or agreement to put on programs that we work collaboratively to create, whether it's as simple as we work with Old Town and sometimes Bangor, definitely Bangor in basketball, to put on a league because we don't have enough teams, or as more complex as working with the university with our summer camp. And then contracted programs are ones that we look at are basically independent contractors, where you agree on the scope of work, you sign a contract, and they provide a service. One of the easiest pictures of that is our Star Walk stable of horseback riding. Kids go to the stables after school and ride. That is a contract program in which we collect a small fee. It depends on what that contract looks like. Sometimes those are revenue sharing of 80-20. Sometimes those are straight revenue and they're just covering our costs. It just depends. And then the last one is more of a, we rent out facilities and people use them. We have no oversight over that. They just use our facility to run a program or a birthday party or things like that. This has allowed us to have some flexibility to not have to expend as many resources to provide the breadth of programming that we have.
I think with facility rental and use, in that category, they're also not having to necessarily meet all of the standards that we would meet. So if you're simply renting our facility to run a program, we're not going to ask you, has that been published to the world so that everybody has equal opportunity to be in that program? We might promote what you're doing as an opportunity, but it's not as governed by the town. So when we say, next slide, please. When we say Parks and Rec, that means different things in different communities. Here, it means taking care of the parks, the trails, the open spaces, the recreational facilities like the baseball fields or the open spaces, the ice rink, and I'll put an S on that because we've got the permanent ice rink, and then we have the smaller pop-up ice rink, the boat landings, we have 2 of them, and the pool. It's programming, which I think everybody kind of understands what we mean by programming. And then community events. Parks and Rec is usually in the middle of every community event that we put on, usually side by side with the library, but just to give you a sense of kind of what we do, this is a little bit smaller, but we're pretty heavily focused on youth sports. We know that's of interest in the community, so we try to pull that out specifically. But this is kind of our core programming and support. So these are the things that we would expect to do every year. And when we say expand, we hope to kind of begin to build off this, but we have soccer, football, field hockey, rock climbing, swim lessons, horseback riding, the after-school program. Every season, there is a community event of sorts. The trunk or treat on downtown event that kind of morphs together. We used to do light up the night. We've gotten feedback that one event in the winter at a specific time is not really interesting to people, that they would much prefer to have multiple opportunities. So we kind of morphed that into a series of winter community events. Light up the night might come back in the post-COVID time. We don't know. It really depends on the feedback we get. I'm not going to go through every single piece of that, but I would say in the spring and the summer, one of the things that eats a lot of our staff time is supporting beautification and trails. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it takes a lot of oversight and a lot of support. We've got amazing volunteers. We couldn't do it without our volunteers, but volunteers need a framework to kind of fall back on. And then in the summer, we have summer recess, the summer day camp, again, beautification and trails, the pool. We run concerts on the green. That's a community event that we have a whole group of staff folks that participate in that, and the library and Parks and Rec kind of take the lead because it's on the village green. And then we also support in ways that are requested, Arts-a-Palooza and the Orono Pride events based on feedback that we've gotten from council in the past. So it kind of gives you the sense of kind of our core. Oh, I keep trying to hit my computer to move to the next page. So we do that with 2 full-time people. The budget that you see is supporting 1.5 full-time people because our Parks and Rec manager, half of her time is supported out of the tip because of the business support and the community events. The collaborative partnerships, we couldn't do it without the groups of partners. COVID has really caused kind of a stoppage in some of those collaborative partnerships, and people are now kind of feeling their way back to what that looked like. But one of the places that we're really hoping to invest more time is with adult education. Prior to the pandemic and even a little bit before that, we had a very strong relationship with adult education, with promotion, not duplicating, but rather promoting the things that adult education would do, giving them space to be able to do it without charging them. It was a really nice kind of symbiotic relationship. We're hoping to get back to that. We have contracts for service, and then of course, Megan supervises, supports a cadre of volunteers. Next slide.
Or a Weezy Little League to the partnerships on there.
Yeah, it's on one of them coming up. Oh, no, it was on the spring. So you can't really see this one because we're covering it up, but the total Parks and Rec budget is $262,000. $972,000. With the majority of that spent on Parks and Rec, $54,900 on the pool, and $35,685 on after school. So when we put this budget together, the assumption was that we were going to, this budget is based on continuing to do everything that we did last year. Last year, we started an after-school program, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So when we look at that $172,000 for Parks and Rec, 99,000 of that is personnel costs. That's an increase of $9,757. No change in dues and licensing, supplies and equipment, or maintenance. Our contractor services went up $3,380. 100% of that increase is portable toilets. There has been an incredible increase in the rental fee for portable toilets. Yeah, imagine that. So our programs and support line has an increase of $8,500. We eliminated a new program budget line of $1,500. We also eliminated the offsetting revenue for that. They're just gone from the budget. But there is a $10,000 increase in this budget for renting indoor recreational space. And I want to speak to that for just a minute if I could. In the fall and the spring and the summer, it is a lot easier for us to be able to negotiate, beg, borrow, never steal, indoor places to do things, not even necessarily indoors. So when Megan decided last year that it was the time for us to add Ultimate Frisbee to our roster, that's easy to do. It's outside, we can easily do it. Probably the biggest pushback that I hear and complaint that I hear is around basketball and inside activities in the wintertime. And the issue we have is that the town controls absolutely no space that we can play basketball in. It is 100% controlled by somebody else. And so when we look at what was available for space, and this is not a criticism of RSU 26 because they're coming to the table trying to work with us. They have their own programs they're putting together. So when we went into the FY22 basketball season, and the only space that was available to us on a consistent basis was Asa Adams. And then we're trying to, we can't go in before 5:30 because we have after school. And we need to be done at a reasonable time because we're talking about younger kids. We are so limited in what we can provide for basketball for K-5 kids. And when we look at what we would like to do, a 1 hour practice and a game on Saturday does not instill fundamentals at all. It is a very, very limited basketball opportunity. If we had our druthers and we had enough space, we would love to expand that. We'd love to run clinics. We'd love to really take advantage of the labor force that we're getting through the university campus recreation to be able to put both at a volunteer basis to put those programs on. There just is not the space. So we have been working with the University of Maine and another private venture to talk about, can we rent space? And my hope is that in the long term that we won't have this expense, but in the short term to get us over the hump, I think we need to step in and at least try this and demonstrate that we can be good partners and make shared space work on campus. So what you see in the budget is an additional $10,000 for renting indoor recreation space that would support expanding the basketball recreation program, that would support adding things that are not basketball. Go through my wish list, right? Pickleball, volleyball, indoor gym time, whatever the case may be. With 2 full-time people, we have an ability to run some of those one-offs. And maybe not just for youth. We do, there are other groups in the community that could use perhaps Tai Chi or. So we are, that's what that $10,000 is. We've been complaining about, or raising the yellow flag, I won't say complaining, raising the yellow flag about lack of indoor space. This is our effort to kind of move that ball down the road without going through the very costly process of building a single purpose space, which I think Councilor Wingard would say, no.
Questions?
Of course. I applaud the effort of looking and growing and finding extra space, for sure. I am curious with the school, now that we have a new CAF, I haven't been there, so I have no idea what that space even looks like. It would be, I think we spoke about this, for parents to drop their kids and have them be there for after school, and if they want to do rec, they're right there, they can do it. Having it right there, I think, has huge advantages for participation. I don't know if that means we're trucking kids up there, or probably not. So I think that's the downfall of that. But again, I love the effort and love growing all of that. But it would be nice if we could do it right, do more and get that. Maybe there's the calf to get with the gym over there.
So here's my thought. For the last many years, I have attempted to maximize the space, and I think consistency is important with any program. So when we talk about being able to go from one to the other, that I think is great. And I don't know that we would necessarily give up all of the programs at Asa Adams with this. I don't know that that would be the answer, the thought behind it. But when we had a need for an additional young kid, K1 group, I could not accommodate that until after the basketball season. We ran another group of it, but I could not accommodate it. So
one of the challenges is size, right? I mean, ACE is small, so when you get those bigger groups in there, it's really, and frankly, COVID has caused some of this because we don't want to pack 50 kids in a very small area. The cafeteria itself is a cafeteria. It's not a gym space. It's not a. It's
to the
not
cafeteria point,
Yeah.
There are pillars in the middle of it, which would prevent kind of that recreation of basketball. They also have screens currently mounted to 3 different walls of the room, so hyperactivity things wouldn't really fly at the moment.
and
I was understanding it that we had after-school program in the gym.
So we're
Thinking maybe
bouncing.
they could
No,
go over there.
We do
bouncing
currently
that.
straddle both spaces. We start the space in the cafeteria where they have some time to do homework. There's options to color, play tabletop type activities, and programming that can be done more sedentary. And then they do rotate into the gym or outside, depending on the day. They usually are in the gym for that back half of the program.
I would also suggest you're not looking at replacing Asa Adams if we're looking at basketball. One of the things that was really successful this year with soccer is that we offered a second day of open time to be able to come for a clinic. So it wasn't team-based, it was skill-based on a Friday, and it was very well attended. And it was optional. Sometimes coaches came with their whole team and they went through it. Sometimes it was just kids, there was somebody there running it, so it was strictly a clinic on a second day, so kids were able to get 2 practices in a week versus one and done. So I see the overflow of that space being somewhat, maybe we need practice because of the timing and the age groups. For some age groups, they might be in a different place. But in reality it's extra time to be able to use outside of what we already get, and the ability not just for basketball, but to look at other opportunities in that winter time, right? So not just basketball, but other opportunities that we could look to add in that space.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's awesome that we're expanding. Access is a key thing that we obviously have to make sure that kids can get to it. So thank you.
Have our campus partners indicated that, that really like renting space and having this money allocated is key to making this happen? Or is it possible that they'd be willing to let us do it for free?
So the feeling that we are getting, so this has been a very long negotiation that started at the president's office, bounced down into facilities, bounced over to R&D. Don't know why, but that seems to be where we're getting the most of the traction, and is now kind of a negotiation between different cost centers on campus. I don't know where we're going to end up, and I would hate to presume publicly where we're going to end up. But what I'm hearing is that one of the issues with campus, it's kind of like what we deal with the wastewater, which is they have all these different cost centers, and you may end up having to pay over here, but then it might come back over here as a net. We don't have the net figured yet. My hope is that we might get a net figured out. So it is truly a partnership, but I wouldn't want to presume on that. I guess the point I would make to town council is that we've been working on this for a year and finally have been given the okay to try to run some pilot that we would rent. And I feel like if I need to prove to them that we can be a good partner to this cost center that we have not spent a lot of time with, I personally think, given what we're hearing is a want in the community, this is a smart way to try to ease our way into what may eventually be not expensive.
Question on facility use. There was a time when school facilities were more available for recreation department. When we talked in the fall, I guess, Sophie, with the superintendent, she was mentioning the fact that once the auditorium is operational, there might be some additional gym time available because some of the dance and choral activities that are now taking place in the middle school gym would likely be shifted to the new auditorium space. Is that anything that we can follow up on, or?
So that conversation is kind of remains to be seen. I don't know what their planning is. Most of my discussions have been with athletics and their use of that. And typically we, to this point, the only one that I know that maybe could go there was cheerleading that was using the gym. That was causing it. All the other like show choir and that sort of thing, they weren't using the gym in the last years. They had been in the cafeteria, and I believe they're moving. But the one that we were running into a lot of the problems was the cheerleading program, because they have to roll with the mats to do it. They have to be there for a period of time, and then so just by the time that after school practices, they come in. And the hardest part is consistency with practice. For us to be able to advertise and say, hey, we're going to have practice. It can't be, we're going to have practice on Tuesday this week, and next week it might be Wednesday. And then they just, and especially early on, that's their biggest challenge, is that when everybody is in there, when we're starting our programs, they're not playing games. They're not, so it's like jam packed at the beginning. It starts to free up at the end, but it's not consistent. And that's one of the challenges.
If we're ready to move off the pool?
Can I ask you a question about Food's Landing? Is that even, are we gonna?
Sure, let's talk Fool's Landing.
I just, the budget for Food's Landing is only the maintenance and association budget. Are we gonna have another conversation at some point about public safety? Food's Landing?
So public safety is in the police budget this year for Fool's Landing.
Yeah, that's
The
in
special
the
detail.
community.
It's part of
Okay.
community policing. Is that what you were looking at?
That's what I would like.
This is just costs out of pocket. This doesn't include public works, mowing, and that's just general maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I had a question about what my fellow town councilors think about the increased price of porta potties and whether that's the kind of service that's really lovely to have, but perhaps we could live without in the name of being economical. Thoughts?
Do we know how often they're being
You're
used? I
asking
mean,
the
I'm
guy
sure we're
who's
not
got the
monitoring.
manual back and forth.
All the time, all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they get used all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't, they are cleaned once a week.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we get phone calls saying, is there any way you can come forward with that? So if it was a situation where they weren't being used, we move it. In fact, we do shift, like Little League uses the field over here, so we have one here early and then we shift it to a different place once they're done, because that way we're not getting two. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I feel with young kids, probably not a place you want, I mean, they'll be in the trees and in the bushes and all that sort of stuff, I would assume, and maybe not particularly what we want, but I appreciate the question.
Certainly.
Is that?
Yep.
Okay, all right, because I will tell you, porta potties, you tell us where to put them and we put them there. Tell us where to take them out, we will refer the calls to you. No, I'm joking, I'm joking.
Sounds like we're referring calls to Leo and other people with small children. So we're
Yeah,
good.
so if we move on to the pool, if you're ready. So the pool is an amenity that is open to the public 10 to 11 weeks a year. It really depends on school schedules and staffing. So we are budgeting for a regular pool year. It's a 10-week cycle this year. And it's got an operating expense of $54,900 and a capital of $86,000. For the capital, Mitch and Megan can talk about the whys. Rob is our leads facilities, and he would talk about the hows of our capital facilities increases here. You will see it in our discussion, but there is a shortage of lifeguards just in general, nationally, in the state, most definitely in this region, and locally. Right now, we were able to mitigate that somewhat with a partnership with Humane Aquatics, because we can offer people indoor and outdoor lifeguarding, which seems to be a hit, and also kind of bounce our people back and forth to help with the hours. Right now, we would expect to have 16 lifeguards in the pipeline that are trained. We have 9. One of them is not a high school student. So this is a very inexperienced group, and we are short. So anything that people can do, if we want to open a pool, we need help with people who can generate interest in lifeguarding, and they would apply by they would apply at Campus Recreation. And if they didn't know how to get there, Megan is the person to see. I swear, I think she would hand deliver applications at this point. So when we look, you'll see the bulk of the pool expenses in contracted services. The University of Maine provides the immediate oversight and lifeguard. So
They train our lifeguards, they oversee them, they schedule them, they deal with any issues that come up because of them. Megan oversees the day-to-day operation of the pool. So if there are issues at the pool, we deal with them here. So it's not a straight 100% contracted service. It's kind of a hybrid, and it seems to work very well. We are seeing in the pool budget, it's up $410 or 2% over last year. It does assume that contract continuing with the University of Maine and staffing for 10 weeks from June 20th to August 26th. The pool schedule, the days it's open, the hours of the day that it's open, and any programming would be dependent on how many people we have coming in on as part of staff, and also their skills and experience. So you can't run diving as an example if you don't have anybody on staff that knows how to dive or to teach diving. Are you raising your hand?
I am raising my hand. Yeah, the sort of number you just quoted is the increase. When I look at those, I'm wondering if there's a typo in the budget where it looks like that's actually a reduction from the budget from last year.
It could be. Let me
And
see.
so I think it's actually down 2% as opposed to up 2% this year. This is page 47.
No, it's an increase where it says 53 municipal pool subtotals.
53 municipal pool subtotals. Yeah, it looks like it was 57,075 last year. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
54,900
Yeah, I'm
this year.
sorry. I don't know. That's an Excel.
Yeah, little Excel foible. Just wanted to point that one
And
out.
I don't know if the Excel foible is on the FY22 budget side.
Mhm.
So bear with me. I'll correct that for next week.
Sure thing.
All right. The chemicals are up, we're seeing, and utilities are up. We're seeing pretty extensive increases in electricity as you do in your home. We're seeing that with the pumps we run here. Chemicals, all of those commodities are kind of going through the roof. And the increase in the staffing and supervision is only about $1,100, so minimal. Most of that's associated with the increase, the planned increase in minimum wage for January of this year. Although when we talk about the pool, you're thinking about this season. The pool season's actually cuts through 2 fiscal years, and we have to budget the onboarding, training, and setup of the pool in the same fiscal year as we're budgeting for the operation of the pool. There is a significant decrease in repairs to building, and that is because when we opened the buildings last year, it had sat for a year, so there was more work. The budget was higher. We brought it down to reflect what we're going to see. And we have taken concessions out of the budget this year. In the past, prior to COVID, we had things for sale. People would, for a quarter, you'd buy a crazy pot. The relationship with UMaine, their employees cannot handle cash. It was very easy to change the ticketing system. And however many people see this, when people show up, Orono residents show up at the gate without a ticket, we would do the honor system last year. We would continue to do that this year. We just say, go down and pay for it, down and, you know. But we're not handling any cash on site. So concessions became a little bit of an issue. Not saying that there won't be an occasional freezy pop being delivered on a hot day. We're just not going to charge for that, and it won't be part of the normal everyday thing. The significant increase in the school, in the pool cost this year, we had to add another $6,000 into this budget. We had budgeted $15,000 last year to replace the pool.
the roof, not on the pool, but on the pool building. And the estimates that we've gotten, given the increase in costs, is 21, so we need another 6,000 to replace the pool roof this year, which it cannot wait another year. It's in really, really bad shape. And then $80,000. People who've been on council for a while know that we have been chasing leaks in the pool. We found a really significant one where the pumps are and the water comes in. We spent money to have that sealed. It works great. It's just not the only place we were leaking. What Rob and his team have determined is that the gutters that are very, very old, so gutters being the whole filtration system around the sides of the pool, need to be replaced. And in order to do that, we have to dig up a nice chunk of the deck, which will cost in total about $80,000 to put it back together. So new gutters and the deck.
And that's not work that will be done, obviously, for
No.
pool season this year.
We would do it after the pool season. Likely, depending on the weather, maybe early next year, but we have to get the money. The big discussion for pool, though, is actually not necessarily this year. $86,000 is a lot of money, but I want to make sure you understand that in FY 24, 25, and 26, there's an additional $138,000 programmed in the capital facilities budget to address the pool. So that includes $48,000 for a pool liner, $5,000 to rebuild the lifeguard stands, $60,000 if we're gonna have a kiddie play area. We've discovered there's some major issues with our kiddie play area in terms of leaky pipe and also setup. And the filtration system, the estimate at this point is $25,000. So while not this year, I just want to bring your attention to the fact that that pool sat for a very long time with very limited capital investment. It's aging. If we want that to last in perpetuity, we're gonna have to invest some significant money into doing that.
That seems like the sort of thing where having a community meeting about the future of the pool and letting people start to build, investment in wanting that as a town project would be really good and strategic in the long term. Could be there will be people in town who will want to help fundraise for something like that and that kind of thing.
I will say, I just did a little bit of the math here, and it looks like it is in fact a decrease.
Yeah.
This would actually be down by 3.8% from last year's.
Yeah, I've got a mistake somewhere, I think, in the FY 22 number, so.
Okay, I just added up all of the FY22 stuff too, but I'm not sure.
I will definitely believe you, 100%, because I look at 54 is in fact less than 57.
Yes.
So I just don't know where my math is wrong. I'll go back and have staff look at that, but thank you very much. I'd like to see down is good. So the pool concerns for this year on the next slide, I just addressed, but you gotta see the really cool slide. Isn't that really cool? Beautiful. And then we move into after school.
Just a question. You said that, so these lifeguards are hired from the university?
Yep.
So if we were like on our personal Facebook stuff, say, hey, town's looking for lifeguards, point them at wherever.
And I'm sure we'll have another one up, but there's stuff on the Parks and Rec website, Facebook that you can share. That have all the connections, where to go and that sort of thing. Worst case scenario, send them to Megan and we can get folks there. That's fine.
We're all invested
Yeah.
in more like.
Anybody, send them to the town. Even if Megan's not here, send it to us.
I'll figure out who you sent the email to and get it squared away. So as long as it's iDon'tKnow.org, I'll figure it out.
All right, ready to move on to after school? So as I stated before, the town council made an after the additional budget was adopted amendment to include the after-school program when we learned that the Old Town after-school program was not going to be run last year. We worked with Lisa Adams and were able to get use of the cafeteria and the gym or the gym. We kind of were fluid depending on what's going on. That is at no cost to the town. And we contracted for program staff and again, direct supervision. This is kind of a hybrid, another one of those programs where the town is overseeing and contracting with the university for a piece of what happens, but this is really a town program that we're able to do because we have a pretty amazing partnership with Campus Recreation. This program, so this budget is based on an assumption that we could continue to do both of those things. Continue to use the school, continue to get the programs, the staff from the university. The after-school program runs approximately from 3 to 5 every day that school is in session. Students have to be picked up by 5:30. From August to December, we had an average of 16 daily participants with 28 unique participants. From January to April, so the end of April, we had an average daily 13 daily participants and 21 unique participants. When I dig into that number between January and April, there clearly was a lag in January and the beginning of February, and then it popped back up. And right over the last few weeks, we've been high, 15 to 16 people per day. But there are weeks that we were down at 10 and 11. So this is offered, we offer 3-day and 5-day registration. And the current fee is $15 a day. We provide local scholarship to residents. This is on a request and qualification basis. We budget this at a net general fund obligation of $8,141. So if you took the revenue that we would expect and the expense, and if you said, oh, we're not going to run this program, we take both of those things out of the budget, it would be $8,141. So that's what I've got. When we move on and we look at, unless there are questions on after
Quick
school.
question about the materials and supplies jump. It looks like a jump of 42% for that.
Yeah,
And I was curious what's going
The
there.
bulk of that reason is we had, when we were putting this together, we had a lot of materials and supplies kind of stuck in closets that we pulled out. They've been used. And so this is more about, we didn't go out and buy a whole bunch of new stuff because we weren't sure how the program was gonna go. And now we've used it and it's time to replenish.
I also believe that line includes their snacks. We
It
do
does.
provide snacks for kids every day. They usually get 2, something more kind of sweet, like a granola bar, or they really like the Mott's gummies there. And then they get a more healthy option like an apple, bananas, oranges, things like that. And kids can kind of pick and choose based on preferences and allergies.
What is our capacity?
Well, that is maybe up for some debate. I think on the website right now, it says 42. In talking with Megan, we kind of built this based on 24.
And so UMaine provides the staffing, is that right? Just again, comment, I'm thrilled that we have it. I think it's I hope it gets its legs under it, but I was almost shocked when I heard it discussed and all of a sudden happened. And I think it's a valuable resource for the community that I hope. Obviously, people that use or need the service know about it, right? There's no more like marketing type that can be done or.
So this got heavily marketed when it got stood up. And quite honestly, it is in line with the numbers that we saw when we were cobbling together after school. The difference is we're not having to pay for space. When we were having to pay $500 a week for space, it suddenly was a whole lot more expensive.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Leo, because we have to have some semblance of consistency in order to be able to staff appropriately and have appropriate effort. But when you look at the need and you see the number of parents going over to pick their kids up at the end of the school day, I think 16 or 18 is a good number, and I don't know that we would expect to see tons more than that. I really don't. The other option that people have right now is to hire nannies or to send their kids over to Old Town or the Y, and we're not seeing, I don't know that I see a ton of that.
Well, we were waiting to see because the Y, you have to sign up for the whole first half, and then you can get out at Christmas, and then you go. So we were waiting to see because we started after they would have already been signed up there. We didn't.
Are they still running a bus to Y? I actually thought I did see that. So they are.
Yep.
So that still goes on as well.
Yep.
So we're not capturing those kids, but for whatever reason, who knows? It's what they were doing.
Right.
Bunch of reasons. Thrilled that we have.
So that's an example of what happens when we see a need, we can get a resource together and we can fund it. That's kind of the goal. The constraints that we have, and I think we've talked about a lot of this, but facilities, gotta have a place to put these programs on, available resources, and I purposely left that vague because one of the things that we're dealing with right now are a lot of those contract services that we had before, the independent contractors, like people that wanted to put on Tai Chi and stuff like that, they're not doing programs quite yet. And so maybe we'll see that come back in the fall. And then the other piece that we deal with is the program participant pool. There are so many people that are available to do things. When you look at our community size, you might expect a larger pool, especially for youth programs. But we really have a very small pool of people to be in programs to begin with. So and they like to do lots of things. And I think that pretty much ends the Parks and Rec. I will tell you, the library has five slides. And Lori has been so patient to be here, and it's not a very large budget. I try to flip Lori and Mitch back and forth so that.
That's okay. And I apologize, I do need to escape to another meeting, but Lori, I looked at the budget and it looks reasonable to me. I have no questions. So carry on, and I trust you all to make good decisions.
The good news, Sonia, is that nobody's making any final
That's
decisions.
good.
All right,
So library.
the library, and Lori's gonna pipe in when we need to. So Lori gave me this quote last year that the library brings people, ideas, knowledge together to inspire lifelong learning and strengthen the community. And I will tell you that so expresses what the Orono Public Library is. It is not just about books. We put the picture of books there because that's what everybody thinks the library is, but it's really a lot of other stuff happening in our library. And I would say our library is truly that polished gem in the community. It is really important. Next slide. So when we think about the Orono Public Library, this year, they are funding 4.5 full-time equivalent positions. we're trying to live this new post-pandemic service level. Where we have returned to in-person programming, which is kind of starting out and will begin to grow. And we're continuing many of the COVID services, so the services that came in because of COVID. Comparing the library that Lori is running today, go back to the library that was funded in the budget in 2019 is not a good comparison, because the level of service is most definitely higher and the types of services much more diverse than what we were doing prior to the pandemic. I wanted to, one of the places that this budget really focuses on is in that continuation of those digital services. Next slide, please. And this shows the blue line is the access of the cloud library prior to the pandemic. The red line would be FY21, which would be right smack in the middle of the pandemic. And the yellow, or for those who are colorblind from left to right on the bars, the yellow is what we see today. So if we expected that reliance on the cloud library to kind of go away when the pandemic started to end, we're not seeing that. We are seeing as much or more use today. People have gotten used to it and are valuing it.
And discovered it during COVID.
Yes.
So that kind of forced them to look beyond what they were used to see what other services were available. And once they got into it, they got used to it and they're using it a lot.
Next slide, please. So when we look at the library, our personnel costs are about $325,000, which are up 5% or $15,330. Our software and licensing is up about $2,600. That is attributable to software subscriptions for the self-check systems that we put in last year, as well as Library Aware, which is software that helps Lori and her staff promote in a more standardized and inclusive way library services. So it's really focused on some of those best practices. The no change in supplies. We are actually decreasing some of the books, magazines, videos, audios, digital content. So those materials, that's down 2,200. And part of that was kind of the plan, I believe, to kind of offset some of the software subscriptions, right?
And digital content.
Our equipment and furnishings is increasing about $1,300. The two reasons for that, the library has been in place for 12 years. So what we see are furniture that looks like it would be fine, and then until you start running your hands around and or trying to sit in it. So we're trying to change that out in a as needed, little by little, as opposed to a big project to change out all the library furniture. And that furniture is not cheap. It's commercial grade furniture. And also, we are purchasing some equipment and furnishings to support that post-pandemic. So some of the spacing stuff and is still there. And then our interlibrary loan delivery is up almost $300,000. Yeah, I was just checking to make sure you're still with me. $290, and that's the increase in the service operating costs. So the Orono Public Library gets interlibrary loan 5 days a week.
5 days a week.
2 days we pay for it, and the other 3, some other entity picks it up. The Maine State Library, the Bangor Public Library, or
And yes, so Bangor area libraries Main State Library, and because we're a Minerva library, Main Infinite picks up the third.
So that is a total increase of $17,320 or 5%. Next slide. So when we talk about discussion, if there are areas to discuss, these would be the ones that we would consider, and I meant to take the bottom one off and forgot, I'm sorry. I think it's important just to note, Lori's not asking for any additional staffing. She's asking for 4.5 people. But that staffing is for routine operations. So when somebody has a long-term illness or absence, or we get turnover, that changes the way the library can operate. And it means that we're having to shift or maybe not provide some of our programming. So there is no fluff in that staffing level. And again, not asking for more, but if council expected a higher level of service guaranteed for the whole year, you need to look at that level of staffing. The fact that we continue to maintain both kind of that hybrid service, the in-person, the digital, and the virtual services kind of continue. And then you can disregard the last.
Or I can talk about it.
No, it's all right, we can disregard it.
Lori, could you share with that? Could you talk just a little bit about the substitute use?
Sure. So that increase is because of an increase in the hourly rate that we are paying substitutes. That position is hard to staff or find because what we're asking of that person is to have a very flexible schedule because there are irregular hours. And we average about 10 hours a week. Sometimes it'll be less than that, sometimes more, depending on who's on vacation that week or who's out sick.
So these are on-call people.
These are on-call people.
Gotcha.
And we're lucky right now. I just hired a new person who starts this week. The 2 substitutes we have are graduate students who do have somewhat flexible schedules, especially in the summer. So it works pretty well. But that's where you see the increase. And we've got, for the past few years, we've had some fairly new staff that haven't had earned time to take off, but as they are with us longer, they earn more time and they are taking vacations.
We want them to be longer.
Yes, we do want them there longer. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Any other questions?
Any questions on library?
I would just say that I had never accessed the hybrid and remote opportunities until COVID. And I participated in some great programs. It was awesome. Barriers for entry were really low, so somebody like me could join. So that was really fun, but it has also been great to get back to the library. So I'm really excited about that. And I had a sort of an operational question. The funds you have dedicated to things like CDs, DVDs, books, are those lines flexible? So if you found that there was a need for more text in one area, could you pull from the DVD line? Is that permissible?
She wouldn't pull from that line. I would adjust the budget.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And we do that
We
frequently.
do. Yes, there's some wiggle room, but it's, yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you for your patient
Oh,
waiting.
sure. Absolutely.
So
I think that concludes our
I got
work.
two quick things.
Yep.
One is just, what I have as takeaways for this is, I gotta fix the pool budget, we'll fix that. A request for a list of positions and wages that we can do. Leo, I need to talk with you about your request for more information about operation, like how the budget, how the increase in the budget and how we got there. I can do it. I just want to make sure I'm not going way overboard with what I'm trying to do. That's what I have. Did I miss anything, any requests for more information? We're good?
I sent an email to the board this afternoon. I don't know, probably anybody read it. On on staffing levels.
I talked to Tom about that. We thought we would talk about it when we did general government.
What's that at the end?
Yeah.
That feels backwards to me. Because I think we should have that in the context of the entire budget conversation personally, but defer to you, but that feels the opposite of what I have.
You tell me.
Let's,
Take it
I
out.
haven't read your email, so I'm not sure exactly what you're asking for. So let's take a look at it and see if there's another earlier spot. I understand what you said about the end being a little difficult with any adjustments on the side too.
Yeah.
So let's see if there's another place you might be able to put it in.
And, you know, I put it out there for discussion. I don't
Yep.
know
Right.
where it goes, what it means, how we process it, but I think on the front end, it makes more sense.
Okay.
Gotta read the email for
Yep.
you. Thanks.
Next, on Thursday, we're scheduled to talk about public infrastructure. That's public works and all of the things that come under public works, including facilities and WPCF, the Water Pollution Control Facility. There is one wrinkle in that. One of my department heads has a spouse that needs to have pretty emergency surgery, I guess, as emergent as they would schedule it a week out, but there isn't much flexibility in that. Scheduled to be here to deliver their budget that day. Feels very strongly, I would agree that public works budget is one that oftentimes we are asked to rework and rethink. The only other option, if we didn't do it on Thursday, would be to flip general government and public works. The problem with that is that general government is scheduled to go on the 2nd. Your final meeting is on the 6th. That does not give very much time at all to rework budget, a service level, capital infrastructure plan. So I have proposed that we move ahead with the plan to do public infrastructure on Thursday. That will give Rob enough time to be able to reflect on and respond to any council desires to change things. It, I think, will flow. The only caveat to that is if he gets to 3 o'clock and his spouse is still not home from day surgery, he kind of has to stay there. So I asked Tom if we could be flexible. Everybody has had the general government, everybody has this one. If we could kind of plan to do public infrastructure, but if Rob is not able to be with us, Belle and I can step in and do the general government one. If you guys are okay with being that flexible, that's what we'll do. And if not, then I'll have to make a decision that will flip things around, but it will be some.
How do you put that on? the agenda?
I would go with, we've already advertised the infrastructure that's posted. I would, on the web version, put a little asterisk that says subject to change, which I guess technically all of the budget workshops are subject to change, but
I think it's a reasonable situation. All right, are you okay with that?
so the only other thing I would say is if people have ideas that they want us to look at to change the budget or things that they want to come back to talk about changing it, cutting it, whatever, revising it, the sooner I can get those those lists going, the easier it is for me to be able to support that discussion when it comes back with that. So this is not it works best for my staff and I if it's not a hold everything to the last minute and then come in with a laundry list of all the changes you want to make. If we can kind of look at that, it's helpful to us. That's it.
Okay. One clarifying question. Is the new environmental position under community development?
No,
It's not.
no, it's under public works. It's environmental services.
We all set? Motion to adjourn? Second. Good. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Val.